Welcome to the garden. Today I'm going to be planting this potato, and this is just a store-bought spud, and it grows these little stems out of what are called the eyes. All those little bumps will eventually grow little stems like this. We've got a little buddy already. So they may look a little bit like roots, especially when they're actually white like this one here. But these are actually the stems, and they will produce leaves if you give them a little sun. Until they get sun, they're going to be white like that, or maybe yellow. And then they do form roots down at the base. Those little bumps are the roots. So I've had this one indoors in a potted plant, and it's got quite a few leaves already because it's been in the sun, and we have enough roots to actually grip some of that soil. I took one of these and I pinched off the little sprout. We've got some green color on there, so I think it has enough root to actually support itself, which is really surprising. Normally you just plant a whole spud, and these are called seed potatoes. These are actually store-bought that I just kind of let go. But normally your seed potatoes will have these little eyes, and they'll shoot out these little sprouts, and then these become the plants. So I'm going to be planting some of these out today, and I've gathered up a few containers. I'm going to do a couple in this really big container. I don't really like doing this because you can't flip them over. You have to actually dig down to get at the spuds. So to make it really easy, I've rounded up a whole bunch of containers, and I'm going to do maybe one potato per pot. That way when we go to harvest, we can just flip these over, dump out all the soil, and then filter through those potatoes without risking damaging them with the shovel. But I've got a few experiments I wanted to try. So I'm going to be mixing in a little bit of compost and some dried leaves. So we're going to have nutrients available right away by adding a little bit of this beautiful finished compost, and then we'll have time-release nutrients in the form of these leaves. I've never done this before, but I've heard of people doing this. Leaves, when they get moist, they will start to break down, so by burying them under the soil, we'll keep that moisture there. So as they break down, they develop what's called leaf mold, and it's this mycorrhizae network of fungus filaments, and they spread all over the place, like hundreds of feet. Sometimes they can just cover a forest floor. So we're going to be trying to replicate that all the way down to the very bottom of this container. Hopefully the potato will be able to tap into that and be able to use those nutrients. So I do like to break down these leaves. They break down a little bit faster that way, and they're easier to mix into our soil. So I've already got one potato down here, so we'll check up on that, and we'll probably plant out a couple more, including this one with a nice set of leaves already on it. So those are beautiful new leaves. They kind of look like a tomato, because they are actually related. Some people have even grafted a tomato onto a potato to get a plant that produces potatoes below ground and tomatoes above ground. So I think that's really cool. That would be a fun thing to try. This is the potato that I buried a couple days ago now. It's got some beautiful roots. Look at the hairs on that stem. These stems will actually shoot up through the soil pretty much as deep as you want to plant them. They can shoot up really tall before they really need nutrients, because they have all this nutrients available in this giant potato. So I usually like to bury them about 6 inches down. That way they can shoot up, and I think they can actually grow roots along the stem too a little bit, kind of like a tomato. So we have a whole bunch of these little stems, and you can plant them all at once, just on a spud, or you can actually cut those up and separate them. So I'll show you how to do that right now. So each one of these stems could be its own plant. these form out of those eyes, and it's a little easier to do this when they're not lanky like this one. But just to demonstrate, we'll show you on this one here. All you want to do is cut little 1 inch or bigger sections, just like that, and then let this part heal over. This is basically an open wound, so it'll go from white to kind of gray. Once it turns gray, it should be just about healed, and then you can actually plant them out. So we'll set that aside, and we can actually keep going. We can do another one here, like this. So this one will have to heal on 2 sides, but it should be plenty. It has quite a bit of starch in this portion here, so it should have enough to feed itself. And then this one we could do one more time, just like this. So there we've got 2 little sprouts on this one. So once these turn gray and heal up, we should be ready to plant them out. We've got 4 little cuttings here just from that one potato. But of course you can plant the whole thing and you'll probably have better luck. So we're just going to mix in some of our compost and even more leaves. And it does take a while for these to break down, so hopefully it'll kind of be a slow release fertilizer for our potatoes. It also lightens up the soil incredibly well, and potatoes need a lot of room. Some people even use potatoes to loosen up heavy soil, because as the potatoes form, they kind of expand and push soil aside. So by giving them room to grow, we could get really large potatoes without much resistance. So I'm going to dump in a good amount of compost, and then we're going to use leaves, and when they're really dry they break apart really easily, just so they can decompose a little quicker and they'll be easier to mix in. If you just mixed in a big handful of full leaves, they kind of clump together and they're hard to like spread out. So I'm just going to break these down, and we can use this to fill our pots. Over time you'll get soil settling, a little compaction, so you want to refill them periodically. So by introducing all that air with these leaves, we're really filling out the space. A little bit of compost too is always great. So I'm going to mix all this in and then we'll get to planting. So I've mixed in our compost and our leaves all the way down, and now we're just going to plant, I think 3 potatoes is a good number, about 6 to 8 inches down. That'll give them a really nice, deep, cool place, so that once the temperatures warm up, those roots will be nice and deep and they can get plenty of moisture. So there's one. This container is huge, so that's why I'm going to try 3 potatoes. I'm going to throw in this one here, just burying all that stem. They actually don't need any sunlight. They'll reach for it and get it when they need it. And then one more over here. I'm actually going to plant this sort of half-rotten one. These are fine to plant because you're not going to be eating the seed potato. It's going to shrivel up, turn brown, and actually the worms can kind of feed on here, it's no problem. So I'm going to go ahead and plant that one. And these are just the regular, I think, russet potato. So nothing too fancy here, but we are experimenting with these leaves. Really curious to see how this is going to develop. So I'm going to be setting up a whole bunch of containers with this same method. We're going to add tons of leaves, crush them down to a nice fine material, and mix them throughout so we get a really solid network of leaf mold. I'm going to be adding some compost. This is basically fertilizer, so they'll have a little bit of available nutrients and then a little time release in the form of these leaves. Then I'm just going to be adding in native soil. These are a few containers that are basically 80% native soil, 20% compost. So I'll be cleaning these up and then just using all this leftover soil to distribute throughout these containers. So whenever building a new container from scratch, I like to start with sticks and leaves. It'll keep that moisture down there. And it especially works well for this experiment because we're going to have a whole bunch of leaves all throughout the system. Then I'll just add in a whole bunch of native soil and compost and leaves and just layers and layers, and then mix it all together. I really want it to be a nice consistent mix at the end. Breaking up that old soil to get new air into here, and I'm using soil from multiple containers as well. That way we get a nice mix. You want to then plant your potato facing up, and the way you can tell is, first of all, the little stems will be pointing up, but on something like this it looks like it's sideways, it's not quite vertical. So that's the way we're going to plant it. Just like that, sideways. If they don't have these sprouts yet, you can kind of tell by the little bump on the bottom. Should be down. So you might be able to see that little, it's kind of like a belly button. So that should be facing down. You can kind of see that the sprouts are sort of forming that upward motion. Even though I did have it laying on its side, it still tends to kind of want to go up that way. So we'll be planting this one like that. So I actually planted out a couple more containers too. All these little pots are potatoes, and they've got one spud each. I've moved a few of them out into really sunny locations, and I've made sure they're pretty level just by kind of putting sticks underneath one half. That way when it gets rain, it's not going to push the soil to one side or wash out. And we've got that compost on top, really absorbent. So this can actually take tons of water. So we're going to keep these nice and moist. And not only is that to get roots on our potatoes, but we want those leaves to stay moist so that they break down. We want that leaf mold to form. So this is a bit of an experiment. It'll be interesting to see how the large container with 3 potatoes compares to 3 containers with 1 potato each of a smaller size. I know the small ones are going to be a lot easier to harvest. So I'm looking forward to those. That's why I've planted so many. And then we do have one more over here. So we'll have a whole bunch of potatoes planted out this year. Really excited to see how many we get. And I even have a couple more left. Still have to plant these ones here. And our little cutting things, these can be planted out too. So I hope to find a spot for these. You can see how they heal. Kind of turn gray, almost brown. So all these should be good. Ready to plant. So I hope you stay tuned and see how these experiments turn out. You can plant your own potatoes right about now. Now is a great time to do that. So you can buy seed potatoes, or you can even use store-bought potatoes that have grown a little bit. So I hope you guys are out in the garden giving it a grow. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.